and Merv Leaquai. Yeah, I got that. So if you guys have any questions, you can direct it to them immediately following their presentation. All right, so with that, I'll let you guys take it away.
All right, thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I'm Todd Carson. I'm the senior producer on the project. Rod's the associate producer on our project, and Merv is a project manager for our international group. And he's here because when we get information from Runewaker, who's the developer on the project over in Taiwan, they always send it to Merv first to start working on translations. So he sees all the text, he knows more about this game than anybody in our whole company. So
that's a big statement.
when you have the tough questions, I'm going to let them handle them. All right, so Dragon's Prophet, as you all know, is being developed by Runewaker out of Taiwan. They're also the developers of Runes of Magic. And we've been working really well with them over the past 6 to 8 months in closed beta and open beta. So I want to start off and show you some of the changes and additions to the game that we've made recently. This is part of our Wintertide zone. This is the last dungeon. It's the epic dungeon, and it's called Iron Fang Fortress. And we just put it out in the middle of July, and there's some really cool bosses in this dungeon. There's actually 4 different bosses, and we're at the second boss here, who is like the keeper of all the food and actually throws food at you as part of the AI. So it's pretty fun. Actually, we should turn the volume on too. This week.
Use the little slider on the right side.
All right, sorry, we gotta get some volume here, the experience on that. So, we started open beta at the end of May, and we've been working really well with Runewaker, getting feedback from the players, getting feedback from our team, and they're really a good partner to work with because they've taken a lot of our feedback, and we've made a lot of changes to the game based on that feedback. One of the things is the way that you summon dragons and how long you summon dragons. If you look right now at the screen, you'll see there's actually a timer. Show real quick. Right next to Rod's character information, there's a timer there. Now, this is, again, we're on a GM character, so things are a little bit skewed. His timer says 44 minutes. Most players won't have a dragon out that long. But it used to be like the yellow bar up there would scale down as the dragon was out, and then you couldn't capture a new dragon. So we had a lot of feedback from players saying, hey, this isn't fair. So we changed the system. So it's a timer now to have your dragon, before he gets exhausted, you have to summon a different dragon. But your yellow bar stays full because that's for using dragon soul abilities and then for also capturing dragons. So we made a lot of changes to the abilities that players have. We actually just reset the talent points as well. And so we're doing a lot of new things. We'll show you some other new stuff that we've done. We're making a lot of changes just to make sure that everyone's happy and we progress through beta until we get to a point where we're really comfortable with the game. So part of Wintertide, which is the newest zone that we've released, we added a level cap from 60 to 70. So now players currently right now in open beta can reach level 70. And we also added, what you see behind this next boss here, like a spirally thing up in the air. It's actually a gate within the dungeon itself, within the instance. And the reason is because you were able to kind of run past a lot of the mobs in the dungeons before, and you weren't getting enough aggro that it would slow you down. And so players were getting in, and some of them were running all the way to the end of the dungeon, fighting the boss, leaving the dungeon, going back, doing the same thing again. And the idea is, like, we want you to experience the dungeon. We want to make this a multiple player experience if needed, ideally. So we've added these gates throughout each dungeon, and you now get an instant quest when you enter the dungeon. So it's more of a true gameplay experience. It actually encourages players to group up because they have to do more battling along the way. Again, we're playing with just one character because we're doing an unnormal amount of damage to these creatures. And he has Nagathon something too. If you haven't seen, that's Nagathon. That's the dragon we're giving away to all the players that are attending SOE Live. And it was really nice. Again, one of the things that Runewaker is working really well with us is we actually sent art from EQ2. And we sent it over to Runewaker and said, hey, can you make this dragon from our EQ franchise in the game? They're like, yeah, of course we can. And did a great job with it, I think. So yeah, you can't fly in the dungeon, so you can't quite show them off yet. So Wintertide itself is has a lot of storyline to it. Wintertide is where the second dragon war took place. when you're out in the main zone, you can see a lot of giant dragon bones. In fact, one of the towns in Wintertide is encircled by an ancient dragon that's just enormous. And then after the Second Dragon War, trolls and giants. Trolls and giants came in. They've kind of taken over some of it. So Iron Fang Fortress has been taken over here, and it's kind of changed the way the environment is. But there's a lot of lore and storyline for the players to get into. This is our third boss right here. So this is right. Oh, and then we have the main boss after this. Yeah. Okay, so 5 bosses. The last boss is awesome because he's riding a chariot. So that's really what we wanted to show you guys today.
At the end of each of our zones, there's kind of a story dungeon that allows the player to cap off their progression quest as they've been moving through the zone. And in this zone right here, as Todd mentioned, it's currently occupied by giants. So if you were playing through the zone normally, this would kind of be the final dungeon that you're going through, and it really wraps up your play experience for the zone.
One of the other things we did, there's a challenge mode out for the dungeons, and it wasn't working quite the way we wanted. We got some feedback on it, so we're actually making changes to that right now. But once we launched in September, we're planning to bring basically survival mode back to dungeons. And survival mode is just that. When you're playing through a dungeon in survival mode, if you die, you have to restart the whole dungeon. And it's the 4th tier, so when you get into epic dungeons, there's 3 different difficulty levels, and then the 4th one is just like, hey, how awesome are you? Can you make it through without dying? They're very optional, of course, for players, but gives them a little something extra. Okay, so here's the final boss for this dungeon, and incorporated some new AI. I'll let you take one. So what you're going to see Rod doing here is he has to go over these groups of spears that are in the ground, and when he clicks on them, takes them, his character automatically throws them, and he has to make sure his camera is aimed towards the giant on the chariot here. And so it's really a 2-part battle. He's got to throw enough spears at the giant. You got to work on it. You're not making the Olympics so far. He's got to do enough damage to get the giant to come off the chariot, and then he's got to do the normal battle.
The name of this boss is Baldy Insatiable, and as far as the lore goes, he's basically the king of the giants that are currently occupying this area. The fight's kind of interesting, like Todd mentioned, because it's multi-phase. In the first phase, typically the players would be doing this with a group of 5. So Rod's trying to solo up here. It's a little bit more difficult that way. But once the player throws enough spears at this guy, he kind of jumps off his chariot, and then the second phase begins, and it's a ground-based combat.
Can you guys hear us okay? The music's not too loud or anything? Okay.
It's definitely challenging for the players because if you were to go up to this boss at this point and try to just normally DPS him or send your dragons at him, the damage is reduced dramatically. I think you'll only end up doing about 1% damage to him. Right. So it really kind of forces the players to use the spear mechanic.
Yeah. And again, this dungeon's really created for a 4 or 5 person group. But because we're actually playing on our QA server today, so there's no other players out there. Because the stuff we're going to show you next is not released to the public yet. So there's no one here to play with us right now. So we're trying to take this guy alone. But normally you try to station players around the different spears, and then when he comes running at you, run away, but then the other guys can still throw the spears. Oh, nice. That was awesome. I like the little heartbeat too when you have a lot of damage.
All of the story dungeons, as we call them, which are the end dungeons for each zone, kind of feature bosses that have unique mechanics, like this one here. The other bosses that Rod was fighting through also have similar mechanics. One of them stacks a bleed attack on you, and basically the players have to kind of alternate and manage that bleed while they're fighting him.
Right. Is everyone here familiar with Dragon's Prophet? Is there anyone that hasn't seen it or played anything? Because I could go through some of the basics too. We'll show you a little more. We'll show you a little bit about the dragon capture mechanics, and then we're going to take you to the dragon lair and show you some of the new stuff there too. Yeah, you're never going to kill him up close. So before we started this demo, Rod said, yeah, my GM character's awesome and I can kill this guy in a couple seconds. Clearly they made a liar out of it. But it's still cool.
Don't let us down, Rod.
One of the things we also did is we or Rune Waker is doing is during our period before launch, is they're going through and redesigning some of our earlier dungeons. Because again, it's one of the areas that players felt some of the dungeons were too easy. So they're adding the mechanics that you're seeing here into some of the earlier dungeons based off the feedback we've had from players.
There's several other dungeons in the game that have these kind of unique mechanics also. For instance, there's one dungeon called Juno Crystal Gallery, and in that event, when you're fighting the boss, other dragons will come in and kind of pick you up and drop you on a random island. You have to fight your way out of that, and that brings you back to the main encounter. So from player feedback, they really enjoy that kind of stuff. So as Rod mentioned, Rune Waker's kind of going through and reevaluating those comments to make sure they're all interesting. And it's not just, you know, some boss that you're kind of hack and slashing away.
Well, and we've also for launch, we're going to do a couple other different things. So as we add more levels to it, we're actually going to make the levels 1 through 30 a little easier to get through. So we're increasing the experience curve so that you can progress through that part faster. And again, we'll talk a little bit later, but we're adding some really cool end game features for launch. So we want to make sure players have the opportunity to get there quick. All right. Progress. All right, that's half the fight. Anyway, so this is really cool. So now they've also done some pretty cool things. He's dual wielding giant axes. Giant, I guess that's appropriate. But he has a couple of cool moves where he actually combines his axe together and does some spin, places him in the ground. Now you have the Runewake dragon out now, right?
I did.
Okay. So you'll notice there's actually a timer underneath Rod's character where he has 5 different dragons out. The first one, which is Nagapin, has a timer. There's only 10 seconds left, but the reason you want to have multiple dragons is because, well, one, they can have different abilities. Oh, you killed him nice and fast. Great. But if you're familiar with the game at all, you'll know that dragons need to recover after battling for a while. But we've actually, when we started open beta, there were no dragon icons there. The only way you could get a different one was you had to go into the dragon inventory, click on a new one, summon it, and it was like very unfriendly to the users. We got a lot of feedback right away, and so we added the icons and now the Alt-F keys, and it's really pretty easy to summon different dragons. And this is Nagapin. It's so awesome. I think it's really exciting because being a hardcore EQ player back in the early days of EverQuest, Nagapin was just one of the ultimate bosses that you could face, one of 2. And now you can actually ride Nagapin in this game. So it's especially for EverQuest players, this is a really cool thing. Why don't we head back to town real quick and we'll talk a little bit about some of the other new features we added just recently in July. And then we'll get you guys over to the new zone we're going to introduce at launch. And so everyone knows we announced launch date is September 18th, like Michelle was saying earlier. And we kind of waited on that because we were really, there's a couple new features and we wanted to make sure they were going to be ready. We want to make sure that the early part of the game, like Merv was talking about, the first 6 zones are polished and the new player experience is exactly what we wanted before we actually launched the game. And we're feeling pretty good about it. I'm actually traveling out to Taiwan next week. And we're going to get the first look at the Citadel system and the guild PvP. So this is the Dragon Chamber. So before we did this update, you have the 6 dragons on the bottom there, which is your dragon stable. You keep that with you as you run around the world. And then the 6 top slots there is your dragon lair, and that's where you can go and you take your dragons and get the show real quick. It's where you can put your dragons to work. You can have them, harvesting different resources, leveling up their skills. You can actually do field training where you have dragons exchange skills from one to the other, which is, of course, one of the real perks of the game. So you don't have to find just that perfect dragon. You find the dragon you like, and you go find other dragons with cool skills, and you actually have them teach this really awesome dragon all the skills that you want. Players are allowed to do 3 field trainings every day for free, and then if they want to do additional, we charge for that. And same thing with harvesting resources. Again, the entire game is able to be played for free. It's truly a free-to-play game, but there are limitations, and so if you want to exceed those limitations and do things to save time, that's where we put in Station Cash. And so this is a great example of how players are allowed to do everything. And so then what we did just in this recent update is we added the Dragon Chamber, which is this big area to the right side. It has 96 additional slots. And again, based on player feedback, our own feedback as well, everyone's like, hey, there's so many dragons. You keep telling me there's hundreds of dragons in the game, but I can only have 12. Well, now you can have 108 different dragons. So it's really more of that Pokemon style. If you want to collect every type of dragon out there, you can. Now, when your dragons are in the chamber, they're not accessible to you. You have to go back to the dragon there and pull them out. So it really is a storage type place. But they're there if you want to go back and take them out, or if you want to, take a look and see which ones you've collected and which ones you haven't. We're also looking at adding dragon achievements for launch. So we'll be able to allow players to see, like in a book layout, like what have you collected, how many dragon types have you collected, just a little more info so that the players know, like, hey, what's really fun, what can they do. So where we're at now is also, it's really the last main feature that we've just added recently.
Come look at my wares.
This is called the Dragon Sanctuary, and this is a guild-only environment. So guilds play a really big part in the game. Mostly at this point, just because of the benefits that they offer to a player. And Merv, you want to talk? You're that guild expert.
Yeah, so basically the Draconic Sanctuary is something that you purchase with your guild technology points. You earn technology points. Everybody in the guild can contribute to leveling the guild by doing a set of objectives each day. And as your guild levels up, your guild leader can place these points, and if they purchase the Draconic Sanctuary, there's 3 current tiers of it. At some point, they'll be able to summon this altar. And the altar really allows players to collect items in the world and sacrifice them to the altar. Based on what they sacrifice, a higher end dragon boss will spawn, and it kind of gives a sense of a guild objective. Since guilds can exist across multiple servers in Dragon's Prophet, the Draconic Sanctuary also provides a centralized location for all guild members to gather and interact. Previously, you'd have to zone into a dungeon or an instance to interact with guild members that are on another server.
And currently, we sacrifice our items, but currently the altar's not working, so that's why it's not out to the public just yet. But the altar part will be coming out. The Dragon Sanctuary is there, and you can actually use dragon flutes, but the Dragon Altar is only available on our QA server, and it's because it's not quite working yet. But it's really cool. So when the guilds come and they summon these bosses, it's not just for fun. They actually will get experience of loot drops, like Merv was saying. But there's going to be a time limit to how often that can happen. But it's really a cool way for guilds to play without worrying about getting griefed by anybody else. And the other thing you can do is summon the dragon flutes.
Oh yeah. If you have leveled your guild to a point where you have the dragon resonance technology, it allows your dragons that are in your lair to go into the world and gather what we call draconic flutes. And when the character uses the draconic flute inside of the sanctuary, it summons an ancient or rare dragon that they would normally have to find or discover in the world. It allows them the opportunity to capture it in the sanctuary. As Todd was mentioning, the bosses that are spawned at the altar also have unique loot drops that are only obtained through this mechanic. So players are incented to go in the world and find these items, sacrifice them to the altar to collect these items. And some of them have really cool cosmetic appearances, so players highly desire those things. Runemaker's intent with the Draconic Sanctuary is it's really kind of, I don't want to say guild hall, but it's kind of a centralized location for guilds to gather. And there's a lot of plans of how the Draconic Sanctuary might evolve in the future, just different things that guild will be able to do in there.
And it's also kind of the prelude to raid dungeons. So post-launch, one of the first features we're going to introduce, but it's not going to be ready for launch, is raid dungeons. We're looking right now anywhere from 12 to 20, maybe a little more than 20 players to go in. So really, what we've been seeing, the Guild Dragon Sanctuary is more like a practice area. Work on your tactics for raiding and stuff like that. Okay, so we've shown you Wintertide, which is the most recent zone. Players can level up to 70. There's the Dragon Chamber, where you can now truly collect all the dragons in the game, because there are hundreds of different species of dragons. And then the Dragon Sanctuary, where guilds can go. What we're going to do now is we're going to take you to the next zone. It's called Inertia.
Inertia, yeah.
Merv makes up a lot of names for our zones, so it's kind of funny when everything comes over to us in Chinese, and when you translate from Chinese to English, it doesn't always make the most sense when it's a direct translation. So we take a first pass, we do translations, and then Merv has a group of designers, and they sit over and they're like, all right, how do we make this quest sound a little more fun than the way it's directly translated? Or tell them about some of the dragon names that come across.
Yeah, I mean, some of the stuff when you translate literally is a little bit bland. For instance, there was one creature, I believe it was called Big Beast. And it was really an amazing creature. It was like a dragon dinosaur hybrid thing with fangs and spikes. And it was undeserving of a name like Big Beast. So we kind of went and took it internally and just kind of looked at it, and I think it's a Dracosaurus now or something like that. But then there were other creatures, maybe Hairy Beast or Large Beast, and I don't know what the difference is between a large beast or a big beast. So we really kind of take the design process and walk through it again to give dragons names that are a little bit more appropriate. Some of the ancient dragons have names that are maybe Evil is the name of the dragon, or Mean. There was one dragon named Mean. So those are, I think, now Ebon Shadowfang or Ancient Shadow, the names that players are familiar with for our ancient dragons. So we're flying through Anartia right now, and Anartia is actually a continuation of Wintertide. So players who have finished the story quest in Wintertide will travel to the north, and Anartia kind of has the same geographic feel as Wintertide. It's snow-covered. It has the same sort of dragon bones, the structures that players are used to seeing in Wintertide.
Until you get to the far north.
The far north is a little bit different because we've talked about the Second Dragon War and what it's done to the landscape here. But in the far north of Anartia, there's a palace, and it's called the Palace of Methus. And Methus is one of the ancient fire dragons in Dragon's Prophet. He's kind of almost a god status. And he set up his palace there, and while unfortunately he died during the Second Dragon War, the remains of his palace are there, and since he was a fire dragon, his presence and the presence of his palace kind of melted the snow in the northern area of Anartia. So that's why you see the drastic landscape change as you move to the north.
Tolchenberg knows more about this game than he was like, I told you that.
There's also neat new creatures that are introduced in Anartia, some things that we've not seen before. There's a lot of these automaton-looking creatures, maybe mechanical golems, have kind of like a drill on one side and a claw on the other side, and they're really maintained by a goblin faction that's in the north. And all of the creatures in Dragon's Prophet, the NPCs, are really influenced by the heritage of the land and the lore, and these dragons kind of stumbled upon this technological brilliance, and they put it to work by making these creatures and are mining the area or gathering resources.
So just so you know, what Rod's doing here is he's actually not on a dragon, he's on his character, and he's using his GM powers because he can actually fly a little bit faster, take you through all the land, show you some of the terrain that we have here. There are new dragons, of course, with each of these areas, and there's some new ancient dragons. You want to tell them about the two ancient dragons?
There's two ancient dragons that basically, in general with Dragon's Prophet, there's two ancient dragons that can be found in the world or in one of the associated dungeons with his own. In Anartia, we're releasing a new dragon. His name is Scarlet Bloom. He's an ancient dragon. He's kind of got a green appearance with red wings. And then the second dragon is currently unconfirmed. But players really look forward to those ancient dragons because it's kind of, you're traveling through the world and you may see a shadow on the ground while you're fighting a normal creature. And you look up and you see that ancient dragon. Players are currently trying to capture a dragon named Shattered Rage and another one named Lunar Frost. And those are the ancients for Wintertide.
Yeah, they're awesome. And the ancient dragons, they don't have a single location where you can be found, because they're obviously very unique creatures, so you kind of really have to do a lot of searching around. There's videos posted on YouTube about players just flying around the whole area trying to find these ancient dragons. So again, trying to keep it exciting. And then there's going to be more stuff here. You know what? Part of Anartia, we're also going to be at launch increasing the level cap to 80, and so that's pretty exciting. And we hope that'll be fairly good timing. That's going to be about 2 months since the last update. When we allowed players to go to 70. So really focusing on two things. One, making the new player experience that we talked about earlier, making that polished, making the quest lines and the level cap, the level increase smooth and fun for the players, as well as the existing players that have been, helping us out through the beta phases, giving them new content to experience as well. So we'll have this new zone up to level 80. Anything before we start talking about the guild stuff that you want to share?
Well, another thing we did is there's a lot of feedback we can take from the players and finding ways we can develop the game and make it better for them. In addition to the changing of the dungeons, upgrading those and making them better, we've had a lot of people talk about their appearance of their character. They want to be able to make it more of an appearance they want. So one of the things that's coming up in the very near future is the cosmetic shop. I'm a little weird because what's in the here. But what this allows you to do allows you to go back through and customize your character again, changing.
She looks happy. She can change her hair color.
Yeah. There we go. More normal pose. And what's really cool with this is a lot of players during the closed beta had the option to choose some of the cool hair colors, lip colors, things like that. And a lot of that was taken away. And what we're going to allow you to do is use those color palettes that you've opened up in the game and change some of those colors using this system.
I mean, you can also re-customize your character, change the way it looks, the head shape, the nose shape. There's a lot of detail in our character customization if you play around with it.
And one thing Rob mentioned is, you can see the color palette that's currently on the screen. Players have been using this color palette to randomly roll colors to unlock. Once a player unlocks a color in the game, they can basically apply that to any of their armor sets.
I think our machine just died.
It's going to power save mode, it's like lost power. Well, Rod's making sure we can show you more of the game. Yeah, so what Merv's saying is, you can actually, once you've unlocked a color, you can use that color forever to change armor pieces or your character.
We have a lot of sets of cosmetic armor in the game, and generally those colors can be applied to 3 different pieces of, or 3 different, I would say color sets, color templates for the armor. So maybe if you had a blue, a red, and a green, you could have a blue, red, and green different colored armor. Well, now since you've unlocked those colors and can apply to armor, you can now apply to your character's customizations as well, like hair or eyes.
So this is actually all right, because the next feature we want to talk to you guys about isn't actually implemented yet. We don't have it on our QA server. And that's the Citadel functionality. It includes the Overlord feature. So for every, on every server, you can get to housing. And the housing area is a combined area it's across servers. So players right now, when they hit level 30, they're actually able to zone up to we call them the floating islands. It's the frontier system. Right now we have 14 floating islands in the game. And that's where open housing lots are for players who buy housing. It's also an open PvP area. Right now there's houses, you can PvP battle each other, play around, but that's really all the functionality there is to it. For launch, one of our endgame features that we're hoping, and I'm actually going to get, like I said, I'm getting to take a look at it for the first time next week when I go out to Taiwan. They're going to implement a Citadel functionality. So each island, which is a big circular island, there's a little section of it that's blocked off, and it's basically like a castle. Right now, it's just an empty castle sitting there. It's got a big fortress wall around it, some structures, but nothing else there. Well, that's going to be populated with NPCs, with catapults, different types of stuff. And so the goal is to have guilds form alliances, which you can actually do right now in the game. So guilds can get together, form alliances, and they can level up that alliance. Those alliances are going to need to go in and capture the citadels. And once they capture the citadel from the NPCs, they're going to be the overlords of that floating island, of that frontier. They will then defend that citadel from other alliances that will come and try to basically take over the island. So there'll be a lot of guild PvP, so massive combat up there. As the overlord for that island, they'll be able to do things. Right now, we've heard they'll be able to control a tax rate for everyone who's got a house on that island. They'll be able to summon NPCs and go around the world and collect different things from the world to set up NPCs to help defend the citadel, when they're offline and stuff like that. So that's one of the things that we're working on right now, but again, all we can show you in game is just the empty citadel. But it's definitely a feature that we feel is important for launch. And so it's one of the reasons we've been waiting throughout the summer to see when we're going to launch the game. And I'm pretty excited that next week we're going to get to take a first look at it. So keep in touch with us, and hopefully we'll have something to show later on this month and get some of that out to you guys. But that's really the new features that we're working on for launch. We're definitely also planning on putting a content schedule together, so we have lots of new stuff. And if you've seen Runes of Magic and the delivery of new content that RuneWaker had for Runes of Magic, we have high expectations that we'll continue to have frequent updates after launch for the players. We're definitely hoping to keep everybody engaged. More cool things with dragons, like aerial combat, should be coming very soon. If you notice, when you do fly around your dragon, there is a hotbar on the bottom with icons, and it's one of the things that we ask right away is why can't I cast spells from my dragon? But we don't have those environments and all those abilities set up yet, but that's definitely something that RuneWaker's committed that they're going to do. So it's pretty exciting, and that's really where we stand. You guys have any questions?